I mean, was that from your travels? Because I know you lived in lots of countries, or was that just something you always wanted to do?
Well, there's a saying, isn't there, that writers are born, not made. And I think in my case, that seems to be the case. My father was a writer, so he wrote non-fiction books about Martin Buber and about the Middle East. My mother was a painter, so it was a very, very creative household. And we had I had quite a nomadic childhood. I was born in Israel, 1961. When I was 3, my parents took us to live on an island called Hydra, in Greece, where there was an artistic community, and my previous novel, The Water and the Wine, is all about that community. The most famous person there, of course, being Leonard Cohen. This was the 60s. Then we lived in Africa for a year. Then we moved to North London. So the whole childhood was it was rather unstable in many ways, but very creative and very stimulating. And there were always lots of books around, lots of conversations about creativity. But what I really liked about the way my parents raised us, and there are many criticisms I could make as well, was that creativity felt like a very natural thing to do. It wasn't forced. It wasn't, we're all going to write a poem or we're all going to paint a picture. It was just, there was creativity within the home, lots of interesting people visiting, and somehow from that, the writing came. And I can't really remember a time when I didn't write. It's always been something that I've done, and I've always been an observer of people as well. I'm very fascinated by people and constantly watching and listening.
So was it the early part of your life sort of the note taking, an unconscious note taking?
Yes, I think so. And
Out at some point.
That's right. Just being that the writer Arthur Koestler has a wonderful expression. He says, if you want to write, soak and wait. Soak and wait. And I think it's a brilliant 3-word piece of advice to a writer, because very often writers write about incidents that happened earlier in their lives. A lot of writers set their novels earlier in their lives, looking back, rather than at the current time. And you can't really do that writing until you've seen what's going on, until you've absorbed it. And I think all of my life I've been absorbing and noticing. There was a game I used to play when I was a child, which I thought all children play, but I realize now they didn't, whereas I would challenge myself to describe something. I do it now. I'll see sheep in a field and I think, right, describe it. And I have to find a way to describe it in as visual a detail I can without using cliches. And that's something I've always done. How could I describe that to someone else?
So do you pull on these experiences when you were much younger to bring them in? I mean, say, for instance, when you were in Greece in Hydra, do those things come in? Or is it the feelings and emotions that come in more?
It all sort of comes in. I mean, in a sense, nothing is wasted for a writer, because anything that happens, it's often one of the ways that I get through life is thinking, I'm sure this will be useful somewhere. I mean, even I'm ashamed to say, when I drove into the back of someone's car by accident, obviously I was regretful, but I did think this will come out somewhere. Or very mundane things like being in a doctor's waiting room and observing what's going on. I know that somewhere, it might not be for 10 years, but somewhere that detail of the waiting room will come out. And it's rather a nice way of recycling life, because nothing goes to waste. Everything could be useful.
Do you get to relive parts of your life in your writing and make them have a different outcome?
Yes, and sometimes, I mean, there's a story I wrote called The Pigeon, which was based on my father finding a wounded pigeon in Siena when we were on holiday, and my parents' marriage was falling apart. And it didn't end very well in real life, but in the story, I used the wounded pigeon to bring them back together again. So it's great fun. You can change the endings. You can change whatever you want, really, and just use life as a basis for creativity.
When was it that you are you putting pen to paper and making notes, I imagine, for quite a long time? When was it that you thought you got something you could publish?
I wrote my first novel when I was 18. So I think it's just something that I've always done. I do write notes, but a lot of it is thinking. A lot of it is, and particularly I find when I have mental space, for example, driving or swimming or walking, at those moments, I'm thinking things through, and I'm trying to work things out, almost like a bit of a puzzle. So, for example, in a novel, I might think, well, if he's going to lose his temper in chapter 10, what is it that's led him to doing that? I've got to work backwards. It's almost a bit like sort of a puzzle. I do love crossword puzzles. It's a bit of a puzzle in a way. You can't have a character behaving in a certain way without preempting it. So you have to work backwards. What could I put in earlier to make that make sense? Oh, that's interesting. Well, maybe he could meet her in chapter 3. You can't spring things on a reader. You've got to sort of bed them in.
Yes, it becomes the creative process. It becomes a sort of knitting together of different things that have to be together in order for one thing to work and the other to follow on, doesn't it?
Exactly. So people will try, people always love to say, where did the idea come from? Where did that start? There's great fascination. And where did you get that idea from? But it's not one idea. It'll be 20 years worth of things which will come out. The writer who wrote The Dresser, Anthony Harwood, I heard him being interviewed in London. He was 64 at the time. And someone said, how long did it take you to write The Dresser? And he said 64 years.
Yes.
And I think he's absolutely right, because you don't start on a Tuesday. Your whole life comes to bear on what you write. And it's very complicated, because why do certain things become important, other things don't? Which things do you fabricate? Which things do you alter? And which things don't you alter? And it's very difficult to explain why certain things make it and certain things don't.
Well, I tell you what, we've set this up, sort of writing a book. Now then, you're going to talk about your latest book. So maybe we should just set the scene, and you should read a little bit of a passage. And we'll
Okay,
so then we can talk about it.
Lovely. I'll just explain what Mixed is about. So Mixed is a novel which is about two sisters, ostensibly Ruth and Miriam Green, who are Jewish. And the novel really is about how these two sisters live a Jewish life. And the answer is very differently. So Ruth lives in North London. She has a Jewish husband. Her children go to Jewish school. And for her, what's really fundamental is passing on her Jewish heritage to her children and beyond. Miriam, the sister, has taken a very different view. She also values her Jewish identity, but she wants to live in the world at large. So she lives in the Midlands. She has a non-Jewish husband, Chris, and her children go to a school where they're the only Jewish children. The two ways in which these sisters are Jewish causes great friction, not only for them, but for their family. And the whole novel is written in a series of, it's a mixture of 3 strands. The structure came from a challah, funnily enough. I looked at a challah and I thought, that plaiting is how I want my novel to be. So the 3 strands are the narrative of the story, funny takes on Jewish recipes, which we'll all recognize, and then monologues spoken by the characters about their lives. So I thought I'd read you a little section of Harold. So Harold is the long-suffering father of Miriam and Ruth. And all Harold really wants is a quiet life. I'm afraid he doesn't get it, but this is a bit about Harold. Harold had one ambition: to find peace, but he never managed it. Living in a house with 3 women had been an utter nightmare. At any given time, someone had a period, or was expecting a period, or was recovering from a period. The only worse thing than having a period, and the moodiness and bad skin that accompanied it, was not having one. As his daughters started going out with boys, and Miriam was especially productive in this area, a late period could only mean one thing as far as they were concerned. But to him, it was just another example of his family never being punctual. Jewish time, he called it. As they were consistently late for everything else, shul, Shabbat, meals, school, why should their periods be any different? Harold was fed up with the bathroom being filled with feminine items, tampons, tissues, earbuds, and balls of cotton wool like little clouds, all designed to plug orifices and absorb liquids. How he'd longed for a son, a nice, uncomplicated, non-menstruating male with whom he could kick a ball and share a beer. someone who would recover quickly if things went wrong and wouldn't remember it or allude to it for the next 10 years. But no, he had daughters. And even though they'd left home, they still drove him the sugar. There was always something going on, a crisis, a problem that he had to know about and hopefully solve. Someone else's mess to clear up. Someone's hairdryer or heart was broken, or they needed money. Do I look like a cash point machine? Or they needed comforting. He dreamed about being on a desert island, palm trees, the water lapping upon a golden shore, silver fish arching from the sparkling sea. So what do you think, Harry? Evelyn was there on at him. About what? He put the salt beef reluctantly back on his plate. Oh, you're so irritating. About Miriam having a non-Jewish boyfriend, that's what. What does it matter? As my father used to say, we're on the earth and then we die, as long as she's happy. Right, so even if the boy's an axe murderer, as long as they're happy, that's fine. Axe murderer, who said such a thing? Your imagination. He thought of Golden Sands, lapping water. So that's poor old Harold, who just wants a quiet life.
Not just poor old Harold. I know a lot of people listening to that, and I was listening to that thinking, oh yes, been there, done that, got the t-shirt. so that really sets up. I mean, you're mirroring part of well, everybody's experience, maybe not just Jewish experience there, but I know sort of that's quite a typical set.
Yes, I mean, I felt there wasn't really a novel, a contemporary novel. There are lots of classic novels, but a contemporary novel which looks at what it is like to be Jewish, not Orthodox, but sort of more mainstream Jewish in the UK today. And so it's right today. And I felt with encompassing these two sisters, I could try and show the range of experience of being Jewish in the world today. But there are also other characters as well who place themselves in different positions. So, for example, their Uncle Gerald wants nothing to do with any religion whatsoever. He won't attend anything, he won't join in. And everyone who reads it keeps telling me that I am Miriam, but actually I'm all of the characters, because I'm also Harold at times, who wants a quiet life. And I'm also Evelyn, who wants everyone to have enough food. I'm also Gerald, who can't be bothered with any of it. I'm also Ruth, who wants more of it, Miriam, who wants less of it. So part of writing is to sort of empathize with all the characters and not just
of
one.
Course, yes. I have to say, if you think of any questions whilst Tamar and I are talking, please do put them in the chat. We'll open up a little bit later, and we can either ask them questions out of the chat, or maybe you can say them yourself. But write them down while you think of them, because you'll forget later on. So where did you get your sources for all these different things? Because you can't have them all in your own personal life. I mean, but are they from casual acquaintances with people you just bump into at a simcha or at the coffee morning somewhere else, or where did they come from?
Well, I think I've been very lucky, because I grew up in North London. I went to a girls' grammar school called Henrietta Barnet in Hampstead Garden suburb, where at that stage 40% of the girls were Jewish. And there was a whole range of Jewish girls, from people like me, whose parents were not very religious, but socially, culturally very Jewish, to really quite Orthodox girls. So I learned a lot through there. And then through my life living in Cambridge and the Midlands and now in Southampton, I've met a whole variety of Jewish people. And I'm always very fascinated about where do they place themselves within the Jewish life, and what does Judaism mean to them? So I think in some way they all have come from people I've met, but nobody is an obvious copy of someone. I don't, it isn't a biography. It's not a textbook. I don't take someone and put them in. It's a bit like, do you remember as a child, we had those books with flaps, and you could do a policeman's helmet and then the duck's body. And do you remember you could sort of mix all the flaps? It's a little bit like that, in a sense, that all the characters are amalgamations of other people, but no one person. I wouldn't take one person from life and deliberately put them in. It's more complicated than that.
So Harold sounds to me like a bit of an everyman in this context. How did you, because there are so many people, everybody thinks of themselves as the normal Jew, let's say the normal Jew, you know, but that normal Jew, that Mr. or Mrs. Average can vary quite a lot, just depending where you are, what your what all the society, the community around you are like. How did you decide what kind of person was going to be that everyman character?
Writing is very complicated because it's and people always say to me there are so few books about teaching someone how to write, and no surprise, because actually it's a very, any creativity is very complicated, isn't it? Because some of it is very deliberate and some of it is quite hard work, and other bits really just fall on the page, that there are parts that I almost don't remember writing because they just sort of wrote themselves. So that's how it felt at the time. And then you become very fond of the character. So actually originally I thought of Harold dying at the end of the book because he has got a heart problem, but I just couldn't let him go, you know, because I was just so fond of him and I liked him so much. I honestly can't say exactly where he came from, Ed, because he's just a mixture, you know, he sort of arrived. It
wasn't so much of where he came from, but you know, whether it's him, I mean, we know about him because you just read that passage, or whether it's one of your other characters, you know, how did that particular character come to stand for that part of society?
It's really sort of, they really sort of evolve. I mean, I don't sit down with a plan. I don't write a list of characteristics. They sort of came. And I didn't want him to be a stereotype. I wanted to try very hard not to make them stereotypical. I wanted them to be complicated characters. So he plays a bit of a role in a way, doesn't he? As sort of the beleaguered husband and, oh, everyone's driving me crazy. But actually, he also personally enjoys it as well. And I wanted to go into his business life, and he's not a great businessman, whereas his father and grandfather had this very successful furniture company. He's not very successful, and I wanted him to be rounded. But other than that, I can't really say where he came from, because they're a bit like uninvited guests, the characters in novels. They just sort of come, you know, and you think, oh, right, you're here. And he feels very real to me.
So this contrast between sort of your more observant side of the family and your more secular leaning side of the family, you set the sort of the more secular side in Birmingham. Was there a reason for that, as opposed to keeping them in North London?
Well, I said Midlands rather than Birmingham, but I lived in Staffordshire for many years because my husband was Professor of Music at Keele University, and so we lived there. And I just wanted someone, you know, when I lived in North London as a child, I took all sorts of things for granted. At a superficial level, being able to get a challah or Hanukkah candles, I thought everyone had a shop nearby, which obviously they don't. But I wanted her to be in a non-Jewish area, so that she has to be, and I think those of us who live in non-Jewish areas understand that you have to be constantly explaining who you are. A lot of the sort of anecdotes or stories in the novel really happened. So, for example, my son going to school and the teacher saying to him, oh, I hear it is your Jewish Yom Kippur, and maybe they said Day of Atonement today, and Ben said yes it is, and he said, well, I wish you a really happy day, you know. And this misunderstanding of what it is to be Jewish. I mean, when I was at university, a girl asked me, do you have a ram's horn? Do you carry a ram's horn? And I said, well, not all the time. And I tried to explain about Rosh Hashanah. And, you know, I think to live in a non-Jewish area is to constantly explain who you are and to make a lot of decisions. Life is full of dilemmas and decisions. Should your child take part in something? Should you attend something? Should you explain? Should you withdraw? And I really wanted Miriam to be in a non-Jewish area so that she would have to express her Judaism with other people. A lot of those stories that happened about looking for the challah are true stories that happened to me.
So you were working through these characters, and you say sort of sometimes a character just comes in and it's a bit of a maybe not a surprise, but it's the character is taking a path, and the character is leading you to write the next bit and the next bit and the next bit. Did it take you into places you didn't expect?
Yes, I think I was more empathetic to certain people than I thought I would be. I mean, there are no evil characters in the novel. I didn't want there to be really horrible people, and there aren't any. And you like some people more than others, as you would do in real life if you met them. I think I was quite fond of Gerald, whose views I don't believe in, because I feel very strongly about my Jewish heritage. Gerald takes himself out of the family. He won't attend the mitzvahs or any social occasion or religious occasion, causing much pain to other people. So at the beginning, I think I was quite anti-Gerald and thought he was very selfish. But then as time went on, I began to see his point of view, which is that his wife had grown up in a cult which left her very anti-religion. He felt in a way that he would rather take himself out of it. And although I don't do that with my life, I felt more and more for him. And the more you write a character, the more you understand them. You have to understand them. Otherwise, you're just going to demonize characters and just make them, cardboard cutout. You've got to get inside them. And that's what actors say, don't they, when they play roles of people who are, very unpleasant. You have to find something to connect with. You have to find something to empathize with. Otherwise, you're not going to get inside. You're going to remain outside them.
Yes. And when you got inside these characters, I mean, I don't want you to give any spoilers away, but did they take you to outcomes that you didn't expect, or was there a path that you kind of knew when you started the book, or did that path change as you wrote the book?
I think the outcome was what I knew at the beginning. I don't sit down and plan. I don't make a list. I'm thinking, as I said earlier, I'm thinking all the time about it. And I think writers can be quite obsessive about it. So I'm afraid when I'm, even in company, I can be thinking, hang on, how am I going to solve that issue in chapter 11? Doesn't make sense. And it does obsess me. I do get quite obsessed with the writing, and I live with the character. So I think the actual outcome I knew was going to be that way. But of course, the details change all the time. And how are you going to do something? Is something too extreme? Should you temper it down? And writing is a very strange occupation because you do it in isolation. So you don't really have anyone to bounce, it isn't a conversation where you can bounce ideas off other people. You're sitting on your own, wondering whether you're being clear. And you don't know if you're being clear, and only much later on when people are kind enough to read it, you get some feedback. But as the process is going on, you just have to feel your way, really.
How do you know when you're happy with a chapter or happy with the end of the book? I mean, you got to your ending, but do you feel happy that you've got there the way you wanted? How you're talking about, you're on your own. How does it come about where you've got to that point? Yes, that bit's finished.
I'm not sure about happy, because happy makes it sound like I think it's perfect, and I know it's not. But maybe some sense of satisfaction. There's some sort of weight-bearing feeling. That's all I can really say, that I feel something has sort of landed, something has got weight, something seems satisfying in a way. And you have to let things go. You can't, my mother was a painter, and she used to say this, that you can't just keep adding to the painting the rest of your life. You have to at some stage say, that painting is finished. It may not be perfect, but I'm letting it go now. And she used to talk to me about how sometimes she ruined paintings by not letting them go early enough. So she's like, I think I'll just add a sheep on that mountainside. And actually, no, it didn't work. And so I've learned a lesson from her about letting things go, that you have to say something is finished. There are stories about Yeats, whose poetry I love. No one ever really knows which is the last version of his poem, because he altered his poems so many times. Even when they'd been published, he would still alter them. He never felt they were ever quite right, because nothing is perfect. Creativity isn't perfect. And I know there are many writers who will say, I look at that novel of mine now and I wince, because I know I didn't get it quite right. But you have to let it go. Otherwise, you'll be working on the same piece of work for, Casaubon in Middlemarch, who's still working on his book, 20 years later. We can't really do it. It's not really practical, is it?
Now, you mentioned Yeats. What are your writing influences? What writers do you admire, and which ones do you think, yes, they've done that like that, I want to do my version of it.
Mm.
Which writers influence you?
Well, it's funny, I don't write a lot of poetry. I write a bit, but I find poetry very, very difficult because I'm too expansive. But I do love Yeats, and I love a lot of poets like T.S. Eliot, Robert Frost, I'm very fond of. Go back to quite a lot. In terms of novels, I read a lot of contemporary fiction. So I like Howard Jacobson, I like Ian McEwan. There's a writer called Tessa Hadley I'm very keen on, Anita Shreve. These are modern, I tend to read a lot of modern fiction because I want to know what them, I love classics too. I'm a great fan of George Eliot and the Brontes, and of course I'm a great fan of Shakespeare, but I also want to know what contemporary novelists are doing. And I enjoy writing in a modern way. I'm not trying to pretend to be a Victorian writer. I'm writing now. And that's one of the reasons that I chose a very unusual structure, I think, because I didn't want to just be writing a linear narrative, especially writing about Judaism, which to me is a very complex issue. There is joy, there is pain, there is darkness, there is light. And therefore, I felt that the structure of the novel had to be complicated. It couldn't just be straightforward and chronological. It wouldn't work for me.
So lots of people will have got the Haller reference, and you said it was a 3-plat Haller, and of course anybody who's on Instagram will be seeing 5 plats, 8 plats. Do you think it could have been more complicated?
I don't think I could manage that. It's too difficult.
And you talk about being contemporary. What is the novel set now, or when is it set?
The novel's set now because, as I said, we can all think of sort of novels about Judaism. I love Isaac Bashevis Singer, for example, but set a long time ago. And I really felt that there aren't many novels. I mean, Linda Grant, Howard Jacobson, you'll find a Jewish character within them, but a novel set now where people are living a Jewish life, exploring what Jewish identity is in the UK at the moment. I really didn't feel there was another novel like that. And I wanted mine to be right up to date.
Where do you think, the Jewish community is at the moment? I think to me, it seems like we're going through a bit of a transition. That place that I inhabited back in when I was growing up, the 1960s, seemed very stable. Everybody was traditional. If you were, very observant, then you were a bit unusual. Now it seems to be, to me, that to be more observant is becoming more of the norm. Where do you see it?
I think a lot of Reform synagogues are going through a very difficult time with diminishing numbers, and as more people are assimilated. And I'm a member of Maidenhead Synagogue, and also I have a local community in South Hampshire, which I'm very involved with. And I was a member of Menorah with Rabbi Michael Hilton for many years. And I do think some of those Reform communities are having a difficult time now with numbers. As you say, maybe the more orthodox, the more extreme are still strong. But for many people, I think it's, finding your Jewish identity within the modern world is not that easy. It's not that easy when you don't live in a particularly Jewish area. Your children are maybe unsure about their identity. Where do you place yourself? Where do you make the boundaries, and how do you get involved? I don't think it's easy.
Was this novel a bit of you looking at your own identity, your own Jewish identity?
Yes, I think very much so. So that's why I'm saying that everyone keeps telling me that I'm Miriam, because she's the Jewish woman married to a non-Jewish husband, living in a non-Jewish area, and yet trying to sustain her tradition. And I think her life is harder than that of Ruth, her sister. And there's great tension between the sisters, great jealousy, rivalry. And I think she is jealous of her sister Ruth, who she deems to have a much easier life because she's in a Jewish area and surrounded by Jewish people and has a sense of community. However, she did make her choices. And I think some people have said to me they found Miriam quite irritating because she complains a lot, because she moans a lot, and she agonizes over every decision. Should she go to the Purim party? Shouldn't she go? And can she get there on time? And what some people have said to me is that Miriam made her choice. She wanted to live a Jewish life in a non-Jewish area. Her best friend is Muslim. She wanted to live in the world at large and yet sustain her Jewish identity. That was the choice she made. And we do have choices. And Miriam makes that choice. And yet she is, you know, quite moany about it and quite complaining about it. And I was quite interested in the reactions of people. Several people have said to me they found her annoying. She's made her choice. She must accept the consequences. Of course, we don't always know what the consequences of all our choices are. I thought that, you know, quite harsh in a way, because you can say, well, you decided to go on holiday there, that's your choice, but you don't always know how things are going to pan out, do you? And I think she thought it was going to be easier than it turns out to be.
Do you find her irritating, Miriam?
I don't find it irritating because, as I said earlier, I think in order to write, I have to not demonize the characters and I have to empathize. There's that wonderful comment of Blake talking about Milton's portrayal of Satan in Paradise Lost. And he said, oh, Milton was too much of the devil's party. In other words, you know, Milton was too sympathetic towards the devil, giving him tears, Satan, and understanding how he felt. He said, oh, he goes too far. You know, he sympathizes too much with the evil character. But if you don't do that, you don't get inside a character. So I sympathize and empathize with all the characters in the novel, and I understand their positions and I understand how they feel. And they do, I mean, it's a kind of, sounds like lunacy really, but they become so real that I feel they almost, and I know they don't exist, but I feel they do.
And Ruth, I mean, is she happy with her life? Is she satisfied? Or does she look at Miriam and think, maybe there's a bit of somewhere else I would like to explore, and I don't
think she feels that. I think she is happy with the choices she's made, but someone said to me that I did a reading the other day, and someone said to me that they found Ruth quite dissatisfied and that she wanted her family maybe to be more religious than they were. She certainly finds her sister very difficult. Maybe she's quite controlling. She wants everyone to lead the kind of Jewish life that she has chosen. And I suppose what I was trying to explore and hope for in the novel was that people would be more tolerant, that I wish we could be more tolerant. I wish we could just say, and this isn't just about Judaism, it's about everything, about sexuality or whatever. I wish we could just say, you're leading your life that way, and I'm leading my life this way. It doesn't matter. You know, it doesn't impact somebody else, the choices you made. And that's really what I sort of dream of, is a more tolerant world where in all sorts of ways, we just say, we accept the choices that other people have made. But these sisters don't accept the choices that the other has made, and they're trying to change the other the whole time, and they're not tolerant.
So now we've got another passage. Do you want to set up your second passage?
Well, I thought I'd just read you a couple of the recipes, because the novel is punctuated by recipes. And the reason I did that was because I wanted the novel to feel Jewish. I want the novel to feel as Jewish as it can. And so therefore, as well as serious topics which are discussed, there also is levity, and there is humor, and there's music, and there are jokes, because for me, Judaism has been a great source and sustaining source of positivity, which I think a lot of non-Jewish people don't realize. I think they think we're all very heavy and we only talk about, you know, anti-Semitism all the time, rather than realizing that for many of us, joy is actually at the heart of Judaism. So there's a lot of food in the novel. Evelyn is the mother of Ruth and Miriam. And the reason I called her Evelyn, and Michael Hilton will relate to this, is that we had a lovely member at Menorah called Evelyn Rose, who was, of course, the most wonderful cook. So my little private joke with myself was to give Evelyn the unfortunate manner of being a terrible cook. So she's called Evelyn, just for a little joke. So I'm going to read you Evelyn's recipe for roast chicken, and then I'm going to read you Maureen's recipe for a Sunday roast. Now, Maureen is the mother of Chris. If you remember, he's married to Miriam. So this is Evelyn. Take a chicken and stuff a lemon up its tochus. That's for our non-Jewish friends as bottom. Roast, but take out when the flesh is still red raw. If anyone comments, say, it's just a bit pink, that's all, don't worry about it. Carve, serving the giblets and the pupik for Harold, his favourite. Avoid saying, who wants breast, or are you a breast man, to Morris, as it will only encourage him to tell inappropriate jokes. Even if you don't say breast, Morris will still tell his favourite chicken joke. So Moisha runs to the doctor and says, "Doctor, you've got to help me. My wife thinks that she's a chicken." The doctor asks, "How long has she had this condition?" 2 years, says Moisha. "Then why did it take you so long to come and see me?" asks the doctor. Moisha shrugs his shoulders and replies, "We needed the eggs." You serve the chicken with grain and vegetables. Wait for an insult from Ida, sister-in-law, about the vegetables being crunchy. Look out for signs of salmonella, nausea, vomiting, abdominal cramps, or blood in the stool. Phone NHS Direct. Harold always says, Israel is the home of milk and honey. Ours is the home of milk and magnesia. So that's Evelyn's terrible chicken recipe. And this is Maureen, this is Chris's mother's Sunday roast. Put the vegetables on to simmer 2 weeks before the meal. Wait until the water turns green. Check for vitamins and nutrients. If there are any left, boil for longer to expel them. Put the meat on a low heat in the oven for 6 hours until it's black and burned. With beef, serve horseradish, lamb mince sauce, pork applesauce, but don't serve when Miriam is coming for lunch. Enormous Yorkshire puddings are obligatory. Plate up the food in the kitchen. When ready, wheel in on a trolley and eat in near silence. Take 2 rennies afterwards. So those are their
That's everybody's idea of a nightmare.
There was that Victoria Wood joke, wasn't there, about if you want Brussels sprouts on Christmas Day, put them on to simmer on bonfire night, you know, so it's that sort of idea, really.
Well, it seems to be the thing to create novels around recipes, or at least insert them in.
I didn't think anyone else had quite done it like that, so I thought I'll have a go then.
I'm going to go to my bookshelf after this and try and find the novel. Yes, I know it's a Middle Eastern Jewish book with basically it's inserted around. Is it Apricots and Honey? I think it's called.
Well, Claudia Roden does lovely narratives and introductions, doesn't she, to her cookery?
Oh yes, but
it's not fiction. It's not fiction.
Yes, those are cookery books. Yes, this one was not fiction. It was actually a biography. With recipes inserted through. It's quite interesting.
Tell me if you remember what it's called. Yeah.
I will. I'll have to go see it. It's a slim little volume, very nice cover. Yes, I shall go and look it up. It's about 12, 15 years since I read it. Tamar, okay, so I think we're going to have time for some questions. So I'm going to take us off spotlight, and I'm hoping that a few people have got questions. If we haven't, then we'll just see. But whilst you're busy thinking about questions, go back on, there we go. Put yourselves on gallery view if you're not already on gallery view. Put your digital hand up or your real hand up and wave it about and get my attention. I've got some notes on the screen, so I might just miss it. So if you put your digital hand up, it's a lot easier to see. While you're thinking of that, Tamar, who do you think are the people who are going to read this book? What's the audience that you thought of for the book?
I suppose it's going to mainly appeal to people like us who are Jewish, who've had some sort of Jewish life, and who are interested in Judaism. But I'm also hoping that non-Jewish people would read it. I have put a glossary at the back of terms so that'll help people with some of the more unusual words. But I read novels set in Afghanistan and India and Japan, and I'm very interested in other cultures. So I see no reason why non-Jewish people shouldn't read a novel about being Jewish, because it's not really just about being Jewish. It's about being a member of a minority, any minority. And the Muslim friend Mehreen, with whom Miriam has a very deep friendship, she goes through exactly the same issues that Miriam does, which is about where does she draw her boundaries, how much does she join in, what's her identity. So it doesn't really have to appeal only to a Jewish person.
Right, okay. And I mean, you were talking about, well, there's obviously quite a few sort of humorous moments in, if not just the recipes. Was it important to get this balance between seriousness and humor? How do you think that works for the audience?
Very, very important, because And when I was teaching in schools, and I used to drive in on a Monday morning and it was raining, one thing that really sustained me were Jewish jokes. And I wasn't teasing when I said at the end of the novel, no research was undertaken for the writing of this novel, because it's true. I didn't do any research because I didn't need to, because those jokes are in my head and my poor family know them all backwards. Morris is the character. He's the brother of Evelyn, who has his own struggles with his sexuality and loneliness, but he takes great comfort in Jewish humour. And I don't know what other drivers thought of me when I used to be driving to work on a Monday morning in the rain, telling myself Jewish jokes and laughing out loud. I think Jewish humour is so important, and irony and celebration and joy. And I didn't want it to be a miserable novel. I really didn't.
Well, no, it's lovely if you've got something that, you know, is heartwarming and can make you, you know, it engages you to feel something with those characters that you've put in front of us. I mean, I think that's a great way of doing it. I mean, even where you got a seriously, you know, or quite a, you know, some challenging topics, to actually bring in a bit of humor and engages the reader a bit more. Brian, let me go to you. You got your hand up.
Tamar, I wanted to ask you, when did you meet my family? You name it, we have them. From the sisters that don't get on, from the some of us Jewish, some of us are not. My mother-in-law is a wonderful artist, but the worst cook in the world.
I hope she's not watching now.
No, she's passed on, but she was wonderful. And likewise, we have a family where we all paint or we all write. And my daughter works for Oxford University, and I think she's on her fourth or maybe fifth novel book now.
Gosh.
My wife, my dear wife, who was an architect all her life, but was also a lyricist back in the 60s, and walks about all the time with a little notebook, jotting down inspiration, people, situations, and we have stacks and stacks of these little memo books with all her writings in. She's actually writing, she retired in June this year, and she's actually sat down now writing a book now.
How wonderful. Well, Leonard Cohen, who's the subject of my previous novel.
Oh, I'm so jealous for that.
Oh, wonderful. He used to write on any surface he had. So if he was in a restaurant and there was a paper napkin or a paper tablecloth, I mean, he even wrote on walls. If he had an idea, he had to write it down. And I'm a little bit like that. If I don't write it down, I may forget it. But what a fascinating family you've got.
Well, it's in your book.
I've never met you before, so I wasn't copying or anything, but I suppose it's just all the different people that I've met throughout my life. It's been a real privilege to meet so many different interesting people.
And it's not only that, Tamar, it's also your what you say, observations with the progressive. I'm progressive. I started off life with my Bubba and Zeta's Federation, then we went to United, and we got married United, and we're now progressive. I agree with you on what you said about that, about what's happening in the progressive. I think the greatest thing an author has to be is observant overall, and if you're observant, you see all these people, you see all these nuances, and it's a wonderful thing, a wonderful talent to have.
Exactly. I mean, the point is that you know, you don't. I remember running a writing workshop once years ago, and a woman said to me, "Oh, I'm afraid I won't be very good at this session." And I said, "Why is that?" She said, "Well, I haven't really been abroad a lot." And I said, "You don't need to be abroad to be observing. You know, we've all got enough. If you just sit in as I said, somewhere mundane like a bus waiting room or a doctor's waiting room, there is enough going on there. If you are observant, if you are paying attention to what is going on, there is enough around us. We don't need to go to India to have amazing experiences to write about. We can write about what we are seeing right next to us every day. And the problem is with being a writer, of course, you can be a bit nosy. And that is a problem, because people can sometimes maybe find me a bit invasive, maybe I ask too many questions, but it's just a genuine interest in people. I've never lost my fascination with people. Thank you. Thank you.
Anybody else got a question? Anthony, is that your hand up, or are you just listening? You have to unmute if you're talking. If you're not got a question, I'll go to Joe.
Hi, Tam. I'd just like to know, of your other books, what's given you the most satisfaction? I should say I've only read The Water and the Wine, so I know you've written others. Which gave you the most satisfaction prior to this one?
Well, I think they've all satisfied me in different ways. So my first novel, Rafi's Shapes, was a fantasy novel. I'm not really a particularly fantasy person, but I sort of felt I needed to get a fantasy novel written. And so I found that very satisfying. The Water and the Wine, I really enjoyed because that was a challenge of mixing fact and fiction, because it was based on the community, as you know, who lived on Hydra, the artistic community in the 60s, including Leonard Cohen. And my parents were part of the community. I lived there as a child. So that was a really interesting challenge of how to combine facts and real characters with fictitious ones. That was a particular challenge, and trying to conjure up the sort of Greek island. And then mixed, I've really enjoyed writing because it's about the experience of being Jewish, which obviously has been the whole experience of my life in very, very different settings. And I've got a book of short stories out as well called The Watercress Wife. And I love writing short stories because they're a real challenge. How do you get everything you want to say into 10 pages? It's quite demanding. And
You've written 100 short escapes as well.
And I've written 100 Short Escapes, which is a book about sort of mindfulness, really. The idea was that I chose 100 little moments, very mundane moments, like a box of chocolates or seeing a rainbow, and describing each of those moments, so that the idea of it is like a little pocketbook, was that you could put it in your bag, and then wherever you are, maybe you can't sleep at night, which I often can't, and you take it out and you read at random a description of one of those 100 moments. And in a sense, it takes you there, which is, I suppose, what all writing is doing, is it really is taking the reader to a certain place and a certain moment. There's a wonderful moment in Ian McEwan's novel, Atonement, where Bryony, if you remember, the young girl, suddenly realizes the power of writing. And she says, I write the word castle and it is there. And it's a great line, because she says, gosh, you can actually tell someone else what to see, which is a wonderful feeling.
So are you going to write a sequel to this one? Or I think you already said you've got a little favoritism in the book with Howard. You don't want to write about him dying. So are you not going to write a sequel?
I have thought about it. I've thought about sort of maybe, one of the reasons I didn't root it in a very careful sort of political, historical time was that I wanted to leave it open so that I could write a sequel. So I may well write a sequel sort of 10, 15 years later. Then I was thinking about the title Mixed, as I could do, more mixed or remixed or mixed too. And I could sort of bring the characters up to date. So I may well do that. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. And Marigold, you got your hand up if you want to unmute. No, Mary, you'll have to unmute so we can hear you.
Hello, Tamar.
Hello, Marigold.
Great, really good description. Very much enjoying it. I just wanted to say, when you spoke to that last gentleman, I think this would make such a good TV series. I really do. And I think that's reflected, as I said to you so many times, how great the dialogue is in all your books.
Thank you.
And this is really, I think this book exemplifies that brilliantly, because the characters come to life, I think, by, not just your descriptions of where they live and the life they lead, but their interaction with each other through dialogue. So great. I wish we could get the BBC to do it.
That would be lovely, wouldn't it? That would be nice. I'm afraid I don't have any contacts in that world, but thank you. I think I do, when I write, I see things very visually, and I often feel I'm almost watching a film as I write. It's difficult to describe, really, but I see what I'm writing.
Yes.
And so I can envisage it on screen, but unfortunately, I don't quite mix in those circles. But anyway, maybe.
Who knows?
It will be lovely. Thank you. Thank you.
Roberta's actually come to my aid, and she says the book that I was talking about was Apricots on the Nile. It was.
Oh yes, that's right. I've read it. I've read it. Yes, it was lovely.
That's the one there.
That's right.
Do you think that there is a message. Did you want to impart a message with this book, Mixed?
Yes, as I said earlier, just a kind of a plea for tolerance, really. I just wish, I want to say to both sisters, it doesn't matter what the way the other sister expresses her Judaism. You can still live your life. You know, for Ruth, carry on living the life you want and that you have got, and be grateful for it. It doesn't matter that Miriam doesn't quite fit your definition of what it is to be Jewish. And the same for Miriam, you know, stop envying your sister who's made different choices. And I wish, and they all struggle with Gerald, and they struggle with Ida. And but I'm always wishing for a more tolerant world in every way, with sexuality, with religion, with identity and everything. Politically, I just wish people would say, that is your decision. I spoke to a friend the other day who said that when he came out and said that he'd supported Brexit, I'm not saying whether I did or not, but he said he supported Brexit. He lost friends. He lost dear friends because of the decision he made. And he's never been able to rebuild those friendships because of that one decision that he made. And I just wish, particularly within Judaism, I can see that Cynthia's commented on it as well, within Judaism, but within everything, that we could just say, you're living your life that way. That's your choice. It doesn't impact on me. I can still live my life the way I want to. And that's what I find so frustrating. And at the moment, we seem to be in a strange situation, and that in some ways we're much more tolerant, for example, about sexuality and about religion. On the other hand, we seem to be very intolerant society. There's a constant criticism and negativity towards people because of the choices they've made. And I wish we would just allow people to you know, live and let live. Just let people make their own choices and don't feel that it has to impact on you or ruin your life. It doesn't.
Well, thanks so much, Tamar. Now that, as we said in the email, we've actually got a prize draw to get a copy of Tamar's book, Mixed. So if you'd like to do that, or you'd just like to donate to JSCN, because we really rely on your donations to keep going. There's a donation page on the website. You can do it any way you want, but any donations made during November go into the prize draw, and at the end of November we'll find out who's going to get that book. But if you're not lucky enough to get the book, or you want to get one of the other books, which I'm sure you do, how can you get hold of your books, Tamar?
Just the easiest thing really is to go on my Amazon page and you know, just look there. Someone's just asked a question about the cover. My mother did the cover, and she was a painter, so it was her cover. So yes, the books are all on Amazon. So thank you very much, Ed.
Thank you, Tamar. Thank you all for coming. We've come up to the hour.